Hey everyone, I'm Mr. Skeleton. Today we've got 10 true scary stories about Appalachian Mountains. But before we start, please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and you can change your mind later. And if you've got any ideas for what the next video should be, feel free to drop them down in the comments. The snowstorm hit out of nowhere. I was cruising along the old mountain road, about 5 miles past the last town I'd passed, when it suddenly started. It was one of those storms that seems to appear out of nowhere, the kinds you never want to get stuck in, especially up here in the Appalachian Mountains. The roads in these mountains can go from manageable to dangerous in the blink of an eye. I was heading to an old cabin my uncle had left me after he passed. He was born and raised around here, and he always used to talk about how the land in these mountains had a certain pull on people. I hadn't been to the cabin in years. In fact, I hadn't been back to these mountains since I was a kid. But now, with my uncle gone, I figured it was time to make the trip. I knew the cabin wasn't far. It was about an hour's drive from the nearest town, tucked deep in the forest, far away from the nearest neighbor. As I rounded a bend in the road, I saw a flicker of something ahead. It caught my attention, and for a moment, I thought I saw lights. No, it wasn't lights. The snow had caught the shine of my headlights, and the ground shimmered in a way that didn't make sense. It looked like there was something buried under the snow just off the road. My eyes strained to make sense of it, but whatever it wasn't clear. I slowed down, unsure, but then told myself it was nothing. Just a trick of the storm, playing with my mind. The snow had a way of doing that to you. So, I kept driving, trying to push the unease in my gut aside, telling myself I was just tired from the long drive. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I felt a weird sense of relief. The small one-story building with a sagging roof looked like something out of an old photo, charmingly worn down. The porch had seen better days, and the wood had clearly been battered by years of weather, but in the middle of the storm, it felt like a sanctuary. The wind screeched through the trees around me, but standing in front of that cabin, I felt safe. I grabbed my bag from the truck and trudged through the snow to the front door. The crunch of my boots was the only sound in the heavy quiet, and the cold air hit me like a slap as I opened the door. Inside, it was dark, except for the pale moonlight that filtered through the broken blinds. The place smelled old, musty, like something forgotten. The air felt thick, like it had been sitting stagnant for too long. I immediately went to the old wood stove and started a fire. The smell of burning wood was comforting, and soon enough, the warmth from the flames began to chase away the chill. The crackle of the fire helped settle my nerves, and I thought maybe tonight wouldn't be so bad. It would just be me, the storm, and a quiet night in a cabin that had seen better days. But even as I settled in, there was something off. It wasn't just the storm outside. It was something about the cabin itself. The walls creaked as though they were stretching and groaning under the weight of time. The wind outside rattled the windows, and the shadows seemed to shift in the corners, moving in a way that didn't feel natural. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it made the back of my neck itch. The storm outside seemed to grow more intense, the wind howling like an animal. I tried to focus on the fire, but my mind kept drifting back to the way the cabin seemed to shift, like it was alive, groaning and creaking, as though it were breathing. The shadows in the corners seemed to move, but I told myself it was just the wind, just the old wood settling. I was almost starting to doze off when I heard it. A noise. I froze. It came from the back rooms of the cabin, deep in the house. The sound was faint but distinct, slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart began to race. I strained to listen, but the noise was so soft, like it was trying to be quiet, trying to hide. I was alone, right? I thought I was. I stood up slowly, my stomach twisting in knots. Grabbing the nearest thing I could find, a heavy iron poker, I made my way toward the back rooms. The hallway was dim, the shadows stretching along the walls like dark fingers. As I moved toward the noise, my footsteps felt too loud, echoing off the wooden floors in a way that made the whole house seem even quieter, even more oppressive. The back room always unsettled me when I was younger. It was the one room I avoided as a kid, no matter how many times my uncle told me there was nothing to fear. He had always said the cabin was built on land that had been there long before anyone arrived. A place where something old, something bitter, once lived, and maybe still did. It sounded like a story, like one of those tales parents tell to scare their kids. But now I wasn't so sure. I stood in front of the door, my hand on the handle. The sound stopped. Everything went quiet. Too quiet. The silence was deafening. I could feel it. Something was in the room, watching me. I didn't know what it was, but I could feel its presence, like a cold hand on the back of my neck. I opened the door. The room was empty. Dust covered the furniture, the air thick and stagnant, but there was nothing else. Nothing except the faint trace of footprints in the snow that had blown through the cracks in the windows. I turned to leave, but before I could, a cold, icy gust of wind blew through the room, so cold it burned. My breath caught in my throat, and a voice, rough and hoarse, whispered right behind me. "You shouldn't have come." I spun around, my heart slamming in my chest, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, just like before. The only thing that remained was the silence, heavy and oppressive, like the house was holding its breath. I didn't stay much longer after that. The storm was still raging, but it wasn't the storm that made me leave. It was the feeling that something was watching me, something ancient, something that had been waiting. I grabbed my bag, bolted out the door, and didn't look back. I'd driven out to my grandfather's old place near Laurel Hollow, deep in the Appalachians, just to get away for the weekend. The cabin was tiny, really just a one-room box with a fireplace and a sagging roof, but it was sturdy. My family's had it forever. I'd been going there off and on since I was a kid. When I pulled in, the snow was already piling up, thick enough that it swallowed my boots when I stepped out of the truck. Everything felt padded and muffled, like the woods had hit a mute button. That kind of silence always feels peaceful at first, but too much of it starts to press in. Still, the first night was exactly what I came for. I stacked some wood, got a fire going, and cracked open a book. The wind outside picked up, howling through the trees. Out here, it doesn't just blow, it screams. Has this weird, high-pitched whine that snakes between the branches. If you're not used to it, it sounds like voices. But that's just mountain wind, right? At least that's what I always told myself. Around midnight, I was half asleep in the armchair when I heard it. This soft, quick knock on the door. Just once. Then again, a little louder. Not pounding, not frantic, just knocking. At first, I thought maybe ice had dropped off the roof, or a tree branch had smacked the side of the cabin. But then the handle jiggled just slightly, like someone was trying to open it without making too much noise. I stood up fast, heart hammering. I hadn't seen another car or person since the last gas station 2 hours down the mountain. There's no one out here. No neighbors. No hikers in that kind of snow. No reason for anyone to be on that trail, especially not in the middle of a blizzard. I moved to the window beside the door and peeked out. Nothing. Just snow falling hard, the porch light barely cutting through it. I almost let it go, almost chalked it up to my imagination. But then the door shook, 2 short rattles, like something big and impatient. So, yeah, that's when I opened it. I know, dumb move. But I had this sudden rush of anger, like if someone was out there screwing with me, I wanted to see them. I wanted them to know I wasn't just going to sit inside and let it happen. But when I stepped out, there was no one. Just wind, cold enough to sting my eyes, and this eerie stillness under the trees. And then I looked down. Tracks, fresh ones, trailing across the porch and back into the woods. But they weren't from boots, and they weren't from any animal I recognized. They were wide, long, and sunk deep into the snow like whatever made them was way too heavy. And the spacing was wrong, like the legs, or whatever, were too far apart, almost stretched. They came straight out of the woods, stopped right at the door, and turned around. I should have gone back inside, locked up, pretended it never happened. But instead I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my coat, and followed the trail. Not because I was brave. More like I felt this pull. like I needed to know. The tracks led uphill, through a narrow part of the forest where the trees twist together like ribs. I was moving slow, one hand on the flashlight, the other trying to shield my face from the snow. My breath felt too loud, like it didn't belong. Then the trees opened up into a clearing, and I stopped. There was another cabin. I'd never seen it before, and I'd been coming here for years. It was maybe 50 yards from mine, but buried deep enough behind the ridge that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. This place looked wrong. The walls were rotted through, like black paper peeling off the frame. Windows shattered. The door hung sideways, barely attached. And across the front, etched deep into the wood, were these crude symbols. Some were circles. Some looked like hands, or eyes, or teeth. They were messy, but deliberate. And they definitely weren't graffiti. They felt older than the cabin. I stood there for a minute, just staring. My brain trying to figure out what I was looking at, why it was there, and why no one had ever mentioned it. I knew every inch of my family's land. Or I thought I did. The wind died down, and everything went still. The kind of still that makes your ears ring. I stepped inside. It smelled like rot. Not fresh, not wet, more like old mold and dry meat. The floor groaned under my boots. Everything was covered in dust except for the walls. Those were clean, and they were covered in drawings. Symbols like the ones outside, but more of them. Some looked like maps. Others, I don't know. One looked like a person with no face, just a hole where the mouth should be. Another had too many arms. There were bones, too, piled neatly in a corner. Animal bones, probably. At least that's what I told myself. One of them looked like a hand. I should have turned around then. I should have left and never looked back. But just as I stepped backward, trying not to breathe too loud, I heard it. This growl, low and slow, coming from the back room. Not loud, but heavy. It shook the floor a little, like it was coming from something big. Not a bear. Not a coyote. Deeper than that. Too deep. I froze. The flashlight shook in my hand. I aimed it at the doorway in the back, but the beam didn't reach far enough. Everything back there was just black. And then something moved. It stepped forward, not fast, more like it was testing the air. I saw the edge of its shoulder first. Way too high. The shape was all wrong. Long arms, hunched frame, and these two yellow eyes that reflected the light like glass. They were fixed on me. It didn't come closer. Just stood there, half in the dark, watching. I stepped back. 1 foot, then another. That's when I looked down at the floor and saw the wet prints. They weren't from me. They were too big. Wider than a man's. And not boots. Bare feet, sort of. Except they had long, claw-like impressions at the toes. And they were fresh. Right next to mine. That broke the spell. I ran. Slammed through the doorway, ducked branches, nearly ate it 3 times on the ice, but I didn't stop. I didn't even try to be quiet. I just kept running until the cabin was in sight. I hit the door, shoved it shut, locked it, and dragged a chair in front of it for good measure. Then I sat down and didn't move. Not even when the wind picked up again. Not even when I heard something, faint, soft, moving around outside, crunching slowly through the snow. I stayed like that until the sun came up. By morning, everything looked normal. Sky was clear. Trees were still. Trees were still. No prints on the porch. No broken trail through the woods. Just fresh snow, smooth as a sheet. I packed up and left within the hour. I'd been living in that old cabin with my mom for almost a year by then. We'd made the move from the city looking for peace, or maybe just an escape. The cabin was old creaky floorboards, walls that groaned like they were trying to tell me something, but it was sturdy. It had to be. Built to survive the harsh winters that the mountains are known for, and that winter, oh, it was harsh. Snow had been falling for hours that night, thick and steady. Mom and I had this routine when it got cold. We'd sit in front of the fire, sipping cocoa, trying to make the best of the isolation. She'd tell me stories, old ones, stories from when she was a little girl, stories I'd heard 1,000 times. She said it was for my sake, to keep me entertained. but I could see through her. It wasn't just for me. She was trying to hold on to something warm, something that reminded her of better days. But there was always something off in her eyes. Something flickered behind them, something like a fear she never wanted to face. I didn't press her on it. I never did. I just watched, listening to her stories, wondering why she looked so haunted sometimes. But that night was different. The wind outside was fierce, like an animal trapped in the trees. It howled, long and mournful, like something in pain. I asked her about it, about the sound, and she just waved it off. "It's the mountains talking," she said with a nervous laugh, but I saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way her hands gripped her mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. There was something about the wind that made the cabin feel smaller, the walls closing in, like the mountains were pressing in on us, telling us to leave. I didn't argue. I didn't say anything, but I felt it too. Something was wrong. I didn't know what, but I knew that something was off. Eventually, we both curled up on the couch, the fire crackling away in front of us. The warmth of the room lulled me into a half sleep. I don't even remember when I fell asleep. The next thing I knew, I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart racing in my chest. It was the silence that woke me first. It was too quiet, too still. Still. I've always been a light sleeper, but this was different. There were no creaks from the old cabin, no groans of the walls settling like usual. There was nothing. The air was thick, suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My instincts were on edge, something deep inside me telling me to stay still, to listen. I heard it then. Soft, deliberate footsteps, slow and steady, like someone was trying to move quietly but wasn't quite succeeding. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the usual creaks of the house, the noises the old wood made at night. No, this was something else. I pushed myself off the couch, my heart thudding in my chest. The shadows in the hallway stretched long, and the dim light from the lantern did little to push back the darkness. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to be careful. My feet moved without thinking, guiding me down the hall toward the kitchen. The footsteps were getting closer now. I could hear them clearly, slow, purposeful. There was someone in the house. But who? And why was I hearing this now, in the dead of night, with the world outside so still? I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I peeked around the corner, and that's when I saw him. A man. Or at least he looked like one. He was wearing thick layers of clothing coats, boots, a dark, wide-brimmed hat that obscured most of his face. But it wasn't his clothes that caught my attention. It was his eyes, or more accurately, the lack of them. His face was covered by a scarf, but his eyes, they were just black pits, empty, hollow. There was nothing there. There was nothing there. No reflection, no light, just dark, cold emptiness. I froze. My throat went dry, and for a moment, I couldn't move. My body felt like it was locked in place. My feet stuck to the floor. He hadn't noticed me. At least, I didn't think he had. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. My heart was hammering in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Then, without so much as a glance in my direction, the man whispered. His voice was low and cold, like it was being dragged from the depths of the earth. "Don't make a sound. I don't know what happened next." I don't know if it was fear or adrenaline, but suddenly I was moving. I watched as he turned and started walking toward the back door, his steps slow, measured, like he knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't look at me once as he passed, and my pulse was racing, my whole body tense. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot. Then the back door creaked open. The cold night air flooded in, cutting through the cabin like a blade, and that was it. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't just let him walk out like that. I ran after him. But by the time I reached the door, he was gone, vanished into the night. The snow outside had swallowed him up, and he was gone as though he'd never been there. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest as I stood in the doorway, staring out into the inky blackness. I don't know how long I stood there. A minute? An hour, it didn't matter. The silence was unbearable. The wind had stopped, and all I could hear was the thudding of my own heart. When I finally turned around, the sight that greeted me made my blood freeze. Mom was standing at the end of the hall staring at me. Her eyes weren't filled with fear like I expected. No, they were empty, just like the man's. Hollow, dark, the same black emptiness that I'd seen in his eyes. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice shaking. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She just stood there, her face pale, her body stiff. And then she spoke, but her voice, it wasn't her voice. It was flat, monotone, like she was reading from a script. "Come back to bed, sweetheart." My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen. And then, just behind her, I saw it. Another figure, tall, dark, standing in the shadows, just barely visible but undeniable. Another man, or something like him. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. I slammed the door shut, locked it, grabbed my jacket, my shoes, anything I could find. When I turned back, Mom was gone. The hallway was empty. The rest of the night is a blur. I don't know what happened. When morning came, I was alone in the cabin. I left that cabin without looking back. I don't know if my mom was ever really there. I don't know if she's gone or if something else took her. It started as the perfect getaway. Just me, my husband, the cold, and the mountains. We'd been planning this for months, a chance to escape the madness of everyday life, to find some peace. The Appalachian Mountains, with their snow-covered peaks and quiet air, were supposed to be the perfect retreat. When we finally reached the cabin, tucked away at the edge of a dense, snow-covered forest, it wasn't the kind of place you'd see in a magazine ad no cute log cabin with a chimney spewing smoke. This place was small, run down, and looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was off the grid, no neighbors, no other houses around, just trees, and silence, and silence. The kind of silence that's so thick it feels like it's pressing against your chest. The owner, a man with deep, tired eyes and a weathered face, greeted us when we checked in. There was something about him that I couldn't quite place, a heaviness in the air when he spoke. "The mountain's got its own rhythm," he said, his voice low and serious, like he was letting us in on a secret. "Don't let the quiet fool you. Not everyone who comes here makes it back." At the time, I didn't take him seriously. I mean, who would? It's not like we were out in the middle of nowhere, right? Sure, it was isolated, but that didn't mean anything strange was going on. But something in the way he looked at me, those dark eyes, so hollow, stayed with me. And as we drove away from the small town and into the mountains, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were leaving everything familiar behind. The trees pressed in on both sides as we climbed higher, the road narrowing, the air growing colder. But I told myself it was just nerves, just the unfamiliarity of it all. The cabin was freezing when we arrived, and there was no real heat, just a small wood stove in the corner of the living room. My husband, who had always been the optimist between us, assured me it would warm up once we started the fire. I tried to believe him, but even as we unpacked, I couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched. It was like the trees outside were moving just a little too much in the wind, shifting in ways that made them look like they were watching us. I dismissed it, of course. It was probably just me being paranoid. I mean, it was a winter storm after all, and the wind was howling outside, making the trees creak and groan in the dark. But as we settled in for the night, that uneasy feeling never went away. By evening, the storm had picked up. The wind was relentless, howling outside, and the snow came down harder, swirling in thick, white sheets. Inside, the cabin creaked and groaned under the pressure of the storm. We huddled close to the fire, trying to stay warm, but the silence, except for the wind, was deafening. Every now and then, I thought I heard something out there, like a soft rustling in the snow, or maybe even a footstep. But when I looked out the window, I saw nothing but the white expanse of the storm. Still, that feeling of being watched didn't go away. It was like I could sense something out there, just beyond the reach of the light from the cabin. Something that was waiting. After a while, I couldn't stand it anymore. I went outside to get some firewood, hoping that being out in the cold would clear my mind. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward the small pile of logs next to the cabin. The air was sharp, biting at my skin, and the world around me was completely still, save for the wind. The forest was almost too quiet. No animals, no birds, nothing. As I bent down to pick up the logs, my eye caught something in the snow. Tracks. They were big, too big for any animal I knew. I crouched down for a closer look. The footprints were human-shaped, but something was off. They were too wide, too splayed, like someone or something had been walking through the snow with feet much larger than any humans. My heart began to pound, and the air around me seemed to grow colder. I quickly grabbed the firewood and rushed back inside, my mind racing. Those tracks, they didn't belong to anything I knew. But I didn't tell my husband about them right away. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe it was just some odd animal. Maybe. We decided to go to bed early, hoping the morning light would make everything feel less strange. But sleep didn't come. The cabin was too quiet, too still. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of the wind felt like it was amplified 100 times. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the storm, my heart racing in my chest. I could hear my husband's steady breathing next to me, but it didn't help. The longer I lay there, the more I felt like something was in the room with us, something waiting. And then, around 2 a.m., it happened. The door to our bedroom creaked open. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. It wasn't my husband. He was still lying next to me, his breathing shallow and steady. This wasn't right. The door hadn't just opened on its own. It had been pushed open, slowly, deliberately, as if someone was trying to slip inside without making a sound. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. I strained my eyes in the dark, trying to make out the figure standing in the doorway. At first, all I could see were shadows. But then it stepped forward, and I could just barely make out its shape against the darkened room. It was tall, hunched, with a ragged coat that looked far too old. The coat seemed to be weighed down by years of wear, like it had been passed down through generations of something ancient. And then there were the eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. They were huge, black, and unblinking. There was something wrong about them, something that didn't belong. They weren't human. They couldn't be. And they were fixed on us, unmoving, as if the figure was waiting for something. I turned to my husband, shaking him awake, but he didn't stir. He was deep in a dreamless sleep, unaware of the nightmare unfolding right next to him. The figure just stood there watching, not moving, just staring. I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but I couldn't move. My body felt like it was made of stone. My mind was racing. Should I scream? Should I wake him? But I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped in that moment. And then, after what felt like forever, it moved. It wasn't a walk or a shuffle. It didn't even seem to step. It just glided, like it was floating, drifting toward the door, as if it didn't need to touch the floor at all. I couldn't tear my eyes away, couldn't look away even if I wanted to. Just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone, like it had never been there. I bolted out of bed and rushed to the door, locking it behind me. But when I turned around, the figure was gone. The room was empty, but the silence was even thicker than before, more suffocating. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. My husband didn't wake up. His breathing was steady, unaware of the terror I'd just witnessed. I couldn't sleep after that. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair, wide-eyed and alert, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. When the sun finally rose, I tried to tell him what had happened. I couldn't keep it inside anymore, but of course, he didn't believe me. He thought I was dreaming, or that I had imagined it. I pointed to the tracks in the snow outside, but he just shrugged it off. Maybe it was an animal, he said. We left the cabin, drove down the mountain, but the feeling didn't leave. But I know this. Something ancient, something evil, watches over those mountains. It was Christmas break, and my uncle asked me to help out with something, said I could make a little money clearing snow off the roof of his cabin. He and my aunt only used the place during hunting season, so it just sat there the rest of the year, buried under snow through the winter months. My uncle handed me $100 up front and the keys, told me to check on the furnace while I was at it. He said I could sleep there if I wanted, just not to burn through too much firewood. He still had some left from the fall. The road past the last house hadn't been plowed yet, so I had to park and hike the last mile or so. Snow was already thick, probably over a foot, and the deeper I went, the quieter everything got. The kind of quiet that isn't just soundless, but feels like pressure on your skin. Tree trunks were halfway buried, and the trail to the cabin was more of a suggestion than an actual path. The cabin looked fine when I reached it. The porch sagged a little under the weight of the snow, but nothing looked broken or collapsed. It still had that slanted tin roof and faded paint, and a crooked mailbox that no one had touched in years. I stood there for a second, catching my breath and taking it in. Then I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled like old wood and dust, and the air had that cold, untouched feeling. I opened a couple windows just to get some circulation going, then got the furnace going in the back room. It was small, just enough to take the edge off, and I didn't bother trying to heat the whole place. Just 1 or 2 rooms to keep livable. That first night, I ate from a can of soup I found in the pantry and stayed mostly near the fireplace. I checked my phone. Surprisingly, I had a decent signal, which made things feel a little less isolated. I figured I'd spend a few days clearing the snow, maybe finish a book or 2, and head back with an easy 100 in my pocket. By the second day, I'd cleared most of the north-facing side of the roof. It wasn't exactly fun, but there was something kind of satisfying about it. I'd work for an hour or 2 at a time, then come back inside to warm up. On breaks, I played games on my phone, poked through some of the older supplies they'd left behind, mostly canned food and old magazines, and even managed to nap a little on the couch. I wasn't nervous about being out there. I grew up around these woods. I knew the sounds the forest makes in winter, how everything's muffled, how wind carries differently when the trees are bare. It was familiar. But the third morning, things started to feel off. I stepped out onto the porch, planning to get started early. That's when I saw them boot prints. A single line of them, coming from the woods at the back of the property. They walked straight up to the cabin and then disappeared behind it. No return prints, no sign of someone leaving. Just a neat, even trail that vanished halfway behind the building. I stood there for a minute, staring at them. Then I walked around to the far side of the cabin, expecting to see more. Maybe someone had circled the place. Maybe they'd gone into the woods from there. But the trail stopped. Just stopped, mid-step. There wasn't any melting, no snowfall overnight to cover them up. The snow was still fresh and hard-packed. It was like the person had just vanished. I looked around for a while, scanning the trees, trying to make sense of it. It could have been wind, I thought. Maybe a heavy gust had blown the rest of the prints away. But even as I told myself that, it didn't sit right. That night, I locked the door and checked every window. Twice. I kept the fire going a little hotter and stayed closer to the light. The next morning, it got worse. There were 2 sets of prints now. One came from the same direction as before, from the woods behind the cabin and circled the place. Twice. The other came from the direction I had hiked in from, following the slope down toward where I had parked. Those prints came straight up to the front porch and stopped. Right at the base of the steps. No exit prints, no sign of either person or thing leaving. It was like they came to the cabin and then disappeared. I didn't go outside that day, not even once. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see someone's face looking in. But there was nothing, just stillness. Too still. Toward evening, I convinced myself I was being ridiculous. Cabin fever or whatever. So I put on my coat and went outside to check things out. I followed the prints around the back of the cabin, tracing the loop, and that's when I noticed something new. Under the kitchen window, just barely visible in the wood, were scratches. Light, thin marks running in parallel. They weren't deep, but they were fresh. I ran my glove across them and felt the edges flake. Whatever made them had done it recently. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch in my boots with a knife next to me, the fire crackling low and constant. Every sound made me tense up. The creak of the walls, the wind pushing against the windows, the occasional knock of a branch outside. I didn't move. I just sat there, watching the front door. In the morning, I opened that same door and just froze. There were no new tracks in the snow, but the ones from the day before, they had moved. Same prints, same spacing, but closer together now, like someone had tiptoed to the door. And near the porch railing, where the snow had been untouched, there was now a deep indentation, the shape of a crouched figure. Knees, hands, and something narrow dragging behind, carving a line in the snow, no prints around it. Just that shape, like someone had crouched there, watching through the slats. That was enough for me. I called my uncle right then and told him something wasn't right. He laughed at first, said it was probably a fox or a prank by some bored teenager. He even told me this old story about a woman who used to scream from the holler at night just to freak people out. Said it was just how things were out there. I told him I was done. I didn't ask. I said I was leaving. He told me I could come stay at his place, but he wasn't driving up to get me. So I packed up that afternoon and started hiking back down. About halfway down the slope, I stopped. I couldn't explain it, just that cold sensation on the back of your neck when you know someone's watching. I turned around. There was nothing behind me. Just the trail, the trees, the quiet. But then I looked up at the cabin one last time. The front door was open, just slightly, a few inches, wide enough to see dark inside. I knew I'd closed it. I didn't run, but I didn't stop either. I kept walking, slow and steady, eyes forward, listening for anything. When I got to the car, I got in and locked the doors immediately. I didn't even start the heat. I drove all the way back to town with the windows cracked, just in case I needed to hear something outside the car. That night, I called my uncle again. I told him I wasn't going back. Not ever. He didn't argue. Just said, all right. 2 weeks later, he called me at night. Said he and my aunt had gone up to the cabin to drop off some supplies. When they got there, they found the front door wide open. The cushions on the couch had been ripped apart. The mattress had been dragged halfway into the kitchen, like someone had tried to pull it through the house. And on the floor, written in soot from the cold fireplace, was one word: stay. They sold the cabin that spring. We haven't talked about it since. My cousin Liam had asked me to stay at his place in eastern Kentucky for a few weeks while he was out of the country. He'd taken a short-term forestry contract in Norway and didn't want his house sitting empty, especially with the snow piling up in the mountains. At the time, I was between jobs and thought the quiet would do me good. He lived way out there, on a sloped piece of land tucked in a little holler right at the base of the mountains. The first few days passed without incident. I shoveled the porch, kept the wood stove going, and made the occasional trek into town for groceries. On the third morning, I noticed something strange. As I was heading out to the woodpile, I saw two narrow lines in the snow. They were leading away from the shed behind the house, cutting through the untouched blanket of white. They were too neat to be boot prints, too even to be someone's footsteps. That night, though, things started to feel off. I heard a noise outside, something sharp hitting the far wall of the house. I grabbed the flashlight and went outside, heart racing a little for no reason I could explain. I swept the beam of the light around the yard, but there was nothing. Just snowflakes drifting down from the sky, swirling in the still air. The yard was empty. I checked the wall the next morning, but there was no sign of any impact. No marks, no dents, nothing. The snow was completely undisturbed. It was like it hadn't even happened. A couple of days later, I found the tracks again. This time, they were coming from the woods, dragging all the way to the shed. I opened the shed door, and everything was exactly as it had been the last time I looked. Tools, firewood, a snow shovel. Nothing out of the ordinary. Still, something about it didn't sit right. I locked the shed up and moved the axe into the house that night. Then the scraping started. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. It came from the back door, slow and deliberate. I lay still, listening. the sound sending a shiver down my spine. It wasn't frantic, more like testing, just slow, methodical scraping against the wood. Then, a second sound, further away, a metal-on-metal scraping, like nails dragged across the aluminum siding. My breath caught in my throat, and I held absolutely still, waiting for something else to happen. But the sound stopped after a while, just faded into the night. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, when I opened the door, I saw the tracks again. Same as before, those two parallel lines, but now they curved all the way up to the doorstep. It was like whatever had been dragged before had been pulled right up to the threshold of the house. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called my cousin Liam and told him everything. He sounded different, like he hadn't been sleeping, his voice thick with exhaustion. When I told him about the tracks, there was a long pause. I could almost hear him weighing his words, carefully choosing what to say next. Then he asked me a question that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He asked if I'd gone up behind the house yet. No, I told him. I haven't gone up there. There was a long silence before he spoke again. Don't. Whatever you do, don't go up there. He told me there was a narrow path behind the shed, leading up a steep rise. It was still technically on his property, but he told me not to follow it. He sounded urgent, more than I expected. You'll know it when you see it, he said. Don't follow it. The next day, I found the path. The snow had started to melt just enough that the dark strip of mud was visible now. It ran up into the trees, too narrow for a person to walk down it. At first, I thought it might just be runoff, but something about the way it curved and seemed to lead up the mountain felt wrong. The shape of it wasn't natural. It led straight between the pines, disappearing into the trees. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at it, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the longer I looked, the heavier the air around me felt, like it was pressing down on my chest. The cold was sharper here. I turned around and went back inside, not stepping on the path. I didn't want to find out what might happen if I did. For the next 3 nights, the scraping sounds came back. I moved into the living room where the fire was burning, and I kept the axe beside me on the couch. I didn't open the door to look at the snow in the morning. I just stayed in, hardly sleeping at all. The weight of the place was getting to me. The house felt like it was closing in, like something was waiting. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. Then, on the 4th night, I heard something new, a voice. It wasn't coming from the yard, it was coming from above the house, from the tree line. At first, I thought it might have been an animal, maybe a coyote or a bobcat. But no, this wasn't an animal. It was too human, too strange. It was this low, elongated sound, like someone calling a name but stretching it out too long, too thin, until it didn't sound right anymore. It didn't make sense. It wasn't a word or even a sentence, just a slow, steady tone. And then the scraping returned. But this time, it was different. It was louder, more purposeful. It moved across the roof, slow and deliberate, like something was dragging itself along the shingles. I couldn't stay there any longer. I called my cousin again, but he didn't answer. This time, I didn't leave a message. I couldn't bring myself to explain what was going on. I just started packing my things. I didn't even think about it. I grabbed the keys, headed out the door, and as I stepped onto the porch, I saw them again. The tracks. This time, they circled the entire house, forming a perfect loop around it. I couldn't go out the way I came in. The only way out was through those tracks. I didn't look down as I stepped over them. I just kept my eyes on the car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I didn't stop driving until I hit the main road. I packed up, moved states the very next week. I didn't tell anyone the reason. Some things are better left unsaid. There was this old friend of my uncle's, a guy named Cal, who owned a cabin way out near the southern tree line in Pine Hollow. Cal had busted his leg in early December, slipping on some black ice behind his garage. He was laid up for weeks, and since no one else was going to hike up to check on the cabin, my uncle volunteered me. Said I was off school anyway and liked the woods, which was only half true. What I really liked was being left alone. So Cal gives me this old, cold brass key and tells me, just make sure nothing caves in or freezes solid. You don't need to fix anything, just look around. The guy was old school, no electricity in the cabin, no gas line. Just a cast iron stove, a well pump that groaned like it was alive, and a few oil lamps. 3 days. That was the plan. I'd bring some food, stock the stove, make a checklist of whatever needed work, and read until I fell asleep. Cal had left a couple of old paperbacks on the shelf, dog-eared westerns, mostly. That kind of low-maintenance quiet felt like exactly what I needed at the time. First day went smooth. I parked at the bottom of the hill since the incline was iced over and walked up with my pack. The snow was maybe 6 inches deep, untouched except for one crooked set of deer tracks that wandered up toward the ridge. I cleared the porch steps first, mostly powder, easy stuff, then did a once-over of the cabin, swept out a wasp nest from the rafters, found 3 small cracks in the back wall where cold air was just pouring in, took some notes, threw a couple extra logs into the stove, and was about to settle in for the evening when I noticed the cellar door. It was cracked open, just a few inches, but enough to notice. Now, I hadn't touched the cellar. I knew where it was, sure, but I hadn't even walked around that side of the cabin yet. And this thing was tucked around the north side, where the wind barely reached. Snow there was undisturbed, no prints, no drift lines. Still, I figured maybe the last storm jostled it. Or maybe Cal had left it that way. He wasn't exactly known for being thorough. So I pulled it shut, latched the iron hook tight, and jammed the lower edge with my boot just to be sure. That night, I slept on the old cot in the main room, right next to the stove. The warmth was nice. Too warm, actually. I ended up shedding my coat and laying there with my boots half off, flipping through one of Cal's paperbacks. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. Not because of a dream, just suddenly awake, heart already going a little too fast. I stayed there a second, listening. The fire had burned down low, casting this faint orange flicker across the ceiling beams. Then I heard it. A thud. Sharp. Sharp. Solid. Not wood settling, not snow falling from the roof. Just one short thump, like something heavy dropping onto the floorboards. I sat up, holding my breath. Didn't hear anything else. I got up, pulled on my boots, still half-laced, and grabbed the lantern. The cabin door was still locked from the inside. I even checked the window latches. Walked the full perimeter outside, crunching through untouched snow. Nothing out of place. Not a single footprint except mine. Except the cellar door. Again, it was open. Not swung wide, but unlatched. Hanging just far enough to say, "You didn't do this." This time, I didn't make excuses. I knew I'd latched it. I stood there maybe a full minute just staring at it, like if I looked long enough, some logical explanation would come crawling out. Nothing did. I shut it tight again, jammed a split log against the bottom for good measure, and went back in. Second day was colder. The kind of cold that gets into your fingertips even when you're wearing gloves. I kept the fire burning hotter than the day before and tried to stay busy, organized the tools in the shed, counted the canned goods in the pantry, sorted through the crates Cal kept stacked along the back wall, jars, rope, bundles of tarp tied with baling twine. Around midday, I took a break and walked out past the well just to stretch my legs. Stayed out maybe 30-40 minutes. When I got back inside, I noticed the crate of mason jars I'd left half unpacked earlier was empty, not stolen. Just reorganized. All the jars were stacked neatly on the top shelf. Clean. Lids screwed on tight. Dust wiped away. Perfect rows. I hadn't touched them. I checked the door again. Locked. Windows sealed. No one had come in, and even if they had, why the hell would someone sneak in just to tidy up my half-finished chore? I stood there for a long time, just staring at those jars. Eventually, I said, "Okay, maybe you forgot you finished it," out loud. Like saying it might trick my brain into believing it. That night, I didn't even look toward the cellar. I kept the fire going strong, stayed under the blanket, read until my eyes started closing, Then, right around 3, I heard it again. Not a thud this time. Dragging. Slow, low, low, heavy. Not steps. Not steps. Not scurrying. This wasn't an animal. This was something being pulled across the floor. Long, deliberate strokes, like something heavy that didn't quite want to move but was moving anyway. I didn't get up. I didn't breathe. I stayed under the blanket, eyes wide open, fists clenched under the covers. It went on for a while, maybe 2 minutes. Could have been 5. Then it stopped. When I finally dozed off again, the sun was already coming up. That morning, I found a trail. Not a thick one, just a faint line dragged through the thin layer of dust on the wooden floor. It started at the cellar door and led straight to the stove. There wasn't anything missing, nothing overturned, just that trail. I took my foot and brushed it away. Then I kept going like nothing happened. That last day, I wanted to wrap up fast. Went into the pantry to count Cal's preserves again. Noticed a couple jars had been shifted, not much, just a few inches. When I turned around to leave, the door to the pantry was closed behind me. I hadn't touched it. It doesn't latch easily. It drags a little, and you've got to push it firm to shut it. But it was closed. No draft, no vibration, just closed. I opened it fast and stepped out into the kitchen. That's when I saw the trapdoor. It was pushed open from underneath. Not fully, just lifted at an angle, like something had nudged it and waited to see what happened. I froze. I didn't speak, didn't even swallow. Just backed away, keeping my eyes on that cracked opening, waiting for it to shift again. It didn't. I packed my bag right then, left a quick note for Cal, grabbed what I came with, and decided I'd hike down to the valley before sunset even though my ride wasn't coming until the next morning. I figured I'd wait in town, sleep on a bench if I had to. But as I stepped outside, something stopped me. The cellar door was wide open, and the log I'd wedged against it, still there, still pressed tight, undisturbed. No tracks in the snow, no prints, no disturbance in the powder at all. But right there on the top step, 3 mason jars, same kind I'd found in the pantry, each one empty, each one clean, spotless, each one with a little strip of torn cloth inside, like a makeshift wick, like someone had been trying to make lanterns or offerings. I didn't touch them, I didn't go near them. I just walked past, one slow step at a time, like if I moved too fast it might notice. I shut the cabin door behind me, got back on the trail, and didn't look back. Even when the wind picked up, even when I swear I heard that dragging sound again, just faintly behind me. I spent the night in the loft above the general store in Coldwater, curled up next to their potbelly stove. The old guy who runs the place gave me a blanket and didn't ask questions. The next morning, I called Cal, told him I wouldn't be going back up. He didn't ask why. All he said was, "It don't like to be disturbed when it's cold." Then he hung up. I never asked what it was. Never asked why the cellar never got sealed or why nobody ever stayed more than 2 nights. And I've never stored anything underground since. I don't care how dry or insulated a basement is. Mine stays locked year-round, especially when the first snow hits. The family I worked for owned a hunting cabin way up near the Tennessee edge of the Smokies, just past a town called Elkmont. I got the job through a local outfitter, just a seasonal thing. Nothing complicated. I'd head up there to make sure the cabin was still in one piece. After storms, I'd check the roof. After heavy snow, I'd knock it off so the weight didn't cave anything in. If the road was clear, I could drive all the way up. If it wasn't, I'd park where the grade started to get dicey and walk the rest of the way in. It was about 1.5 miles, steep but manageable. That week, a deep freeze rolled in Sunday night. Temps dropped fast, everything iced over, and the snow from the last storm froze solid. I thought about calling in, thought about saying I couldn't make it up. But the road looked passable when I checked the ranger cams, and I really didn't want to give them a reason to pull me from the schedule, so I went. The drive up was uneventful, just slow. When I got close, I parked just below the first switchback and hiked the last stretch. The snow was so crusted over it hardly crunched under my boots. Air was dead still. That kind of quiet where you can hear your own pulse after a few minutes. The cabin was what you'd expect. One room, rough timber walls, a cot against the back, and a little pot-belly stove in the middle. There was a shed behind it, just a lean-to nailed into the slope. That's where I kept the shovel, bags of salt, an old toolbox that probably hadn't been opened in years. When I stepped inside, I could tell nothing had been disturbed. Shutters were still latched from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No animal tracks in the snow except mine. I lit the lantern, ran through my usual checks, then went to clean out the stove like I always did, and that's when I saw them. A small stack of cassette tapes, just sitting there inside the firebox. Not a trace of ash on them. Not melted. Not even worn looking. Just perfectly intact, right in the spot where a fire would have gone. At first, I just stared at them, trying to make sense of how they got there. They looked old. The plastic was yellowed, and most of the labels were worn to the point of being unreadable. I didn't touch them. Just stood there trying to remember if maybe someone else had stashed them during a rental. But the place wasn't exactly a summer camp. Mostly hunters, a few serious hikers. Nobody was coming up here to listen to music. The logbook didn't mention anything. No note about media, no recorded damage, no lost property, nothing. Eventually, I took the stove poker and nudged one of the tapes out. The metal clicked softly as it rolled, and when I picked it up, it was warm. Not hot, just body temperature maybe, which made no sense because the stove was stone cold. No ash, no smell, no smoke marks. I had this little portable tape player in my pack. Ran on AAS. I kept it for music during long shifts or hikes. I wasn't planning to play the tape, I really wasn't, but something about the whole thing just felt wrong. Not dramatic or spooky, just a quiet sense that I needed to know. Like if I left without checking, I'd be making a mistake I couldn't undo. So I loaded the tape and hit play. Nothing. The reels turned. The player was definitely working, but not a single sound came through. I turned the volume up all the way. Still just dead air. Not even static. I figured maybe the tape had degraded from cold or moisture. Tried another one. This one clicked when it started. Then came this slow, dragging sound like someone sliding heavy boots across old, wet floorboards. You could hear each step pulling up. A kind of sticky resistance in it. I shut the player off. Took the batteries out, just to be safe. When I looked back at the stove, the tapes were gone. I blinked. Checked the hearth. Checked the floor. Nothing. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. My footprints were still the only ones in the snow. No sign anyone had been nearby. I walked around the cabin, checked behind the woodpile, behind the propane tank. Nothing. When I came back in, I sat down on the edge of the bunk, unzipped my parka, and tried to write out a note for the log. I wasn't even sure what I was trying to say, maybe just a line about finding something unusual. I never got that far, because when I looked up, the tapes were back. They were now neatly lined up in a row on the shelf over the sink. Same tapes, same worn labels, like they'd been there all along, except they hadn't. I hadn't gone anywhere near that shelf, hadn't even crossed the room. That was enough for me. I grabbed a plastic grocery bag from my pack, dumped the tapes in, and carried them out to the shed, locked the door behind me, then looped the chain through the latch and padlocked it too. I didn't want them inside the cabin with me. I finished scraping the stove, noted a chimney issue in the logbook. Just normal stuff. Nothing about the tapes. Nothing about what I'd seen. It started snowing again around dusk. Heavy, windless flakes. I wasn't about to try hiking back down in that, so I rolled out my sleeping bag by the far wall and got the stove going again. The warmth helped, so did the lantern. Things settled down, until right before I fell asleep. That's when I heard the knock. 2 clean, sharp taps. Not from the door, not from the windows. It came from inside the wall. The back wall, across from where I was lying. I sat straight up. The stove was still flickering, throwing light. I didn't move, just listened. Then the knock came again. I got my boots on and stepped outside. Walked around the back with my flashlight. There were no tracks. No animals. I stood there for a long minute, waiting to hear anything else. Then I walked to the shed. The chain was still in place, still looped just like I'd left it. I unlocked it and pulled the door open. The bag was on the floor, empty, just sitting there like someone had turned it inside out and set it down gently. I stepped back, shut the door, and tried not to look at the trees on the way back in. When I opened the cabin door, the heat hit me first. Or rather, the lack of it. The stove was cold, not flickering down, not slowly dying out. Cold. No embers, no smoke, just an unlit stove and a chill in the air. I didn't even take off my boots. I sat on the floor with the hatchet across my lap and waited. The rest of the night passed in pieces. Every few minutes, a creak, a snap, a small thud, normal cabin sounds, except now each one made my jaw tighten. But nothing else happened. No more knocks. No movement. Just that awful, waiting silence. When the first hint of light came through the shutters, I stood up and opened the logbook to jot down a quick note before I left. There was already something written there. Same page, bottom line. A short sentence in handwriting that definitely wasn't mine. Do not leave again without listening. I closed the book, slid it into my pack, and didn't look around the room again. Just packed my gear, snuffed the lantern, and stepped outside. Left the door shut behind me. When I got back to town, I told the outfitter that the road had iced over worse than expected. Said I didn't feel comfortable doing higher elevation checks in those conditions. They nodded, said it wasn't a problem. Reassigned me to some of the cabins closer to the park border. 2 days later, they sent someone else up to the same cabin. A guy named Matt, I think. Younger than me. I didn't know him well. The only reason I even heard what happened is because the front desk girl mentioned it in passing, said he never made it to the cabin. Turned around halfway up and claimed he got lost. But that trail, it's a single route. One road, clearly marked the whole way. You don't get lost unless you're trying to. A few days later, I was clearing out my pack at home. Found something wedged beneath the inner flap, tucked under my spare socks. A cassette. I didn't touch it. I zipped the pack shut, walked it out behind the ranger station, and left the tape buried in the snowbank behind the maintenance shed. I didn't tell anyone. That was my last winter working above the ridgeline. I still take jobs now and then, trail maintenance, gear checks, stuff like that, but I stick to the lower valleys. Below the frost line. That winter, I'd signed up with this nonprofit group that does home repairs for older folks in the Appalachian foothills. We were a small, rotating crew, 6 of us total, though it was rare for everyone to be on site at the same time. Most of the projects were in places so remote, GPS basically threw up its hands an hour before you got there, the kind of towns where cell service is just a rumor. That meant everything ran on paper maps, landlines, and notes scribbled on the backs of gas receipts. That week, I was the only one who showed up. The coordinator, Liam, quiet guy, used to be a contractor, asked if I'd be willing to finish insulating a cabin on my own. Said it was for an older couple who'd already gone south to stay with their daughter for the winter. He handed me the key, a printed out map with hand-drawn notes, and told me the insulation had already been dropped off up at the site. The cabin was up near Big Laurel. That's 2 ridge lines east of Burnsville and not really near anything. He said the road up was rough, but not impossible. I left around mid-morning. Light snow had started falling right after I turned off the main road. The drive got sketchier the higher I went. Switchbacks, narrow shoulders, lots of icy patches. Trees hung low, heavy with snow. The ridge the cabin sat on curled around like a question mark. By the time I pulled in, there were no visible tire tracks behind me anymore. It was just me and the silence. The cabin was small, 1-story, cedar walls, tin roof that dipped slightly in the middle like it had been through a few too many ice storms. Looked sturdy though, well kept. Definitely the kind of place someone had lived in for a long time. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. No heat, no lights, just the smell of old wood and dust. I got to work right away, starting in the kitchen, pulled off the old paneling beneath the sink to check the moisture barrier. That's when I found the first weird thing. There was a folded receipt shoved back into the wall cavity, browned around the edges, like it had been there a while, but the timestamp was only 2 weeks old. It listed out the exact insulation materials, same quantities I had outside in my truck. At the bottom it said, in clean block letters, iron installation, silase train fleet. I stared at it for a while. I hadn't been up there yet, hadn't even been assigned the job 2 weeks ago. I flipped the receipt over. Someone had scribbled a phone number on the back. I pulled out my phone, but of course, no signal. Figured maybe someone else had done the job already and nobody updated the files. Still, something about it nagged at me. I folded the receipt and slid it into my jacket pocket. Next up was the living room. The paneling came off easy. The crawlspace hatch was built into the floor beneath an old cast iron stove. I lifted the hatch and dropped down into the crawlspace. Immediately, it was colder. Not just chilly cold enough that my breath turned white and hung there like smoke. I strung up insulation like I was supposed to, stapling it to the underside of the floor joists. Everything was going fine until I spotted something hanging above me. A work tag, the kind we use to log job progress. And it had my name on it, SYLS. Same spelling, same blocky handwriting I usually default to when I'm rushing through paperwork. The date said Tuesday today. Time logged 14:30. I checked my watch. It wasn't even 1400 yet. I climbed out faster than I meant to, nearly smacked my head on the stove. I stepped into the kitchen, trying to work through it logically. Maybe someone else with the same name. Maybe I wrote it and forgot. I didn't like either option. Then I noticed something else on the counter that hadn't been there before. A thermos. Not mine. Black, scuffed, and dented on the side. I unscrewed the lid. Still warm inside. Some kind of tea-piney, herbal, almost minty. I put it down and opened the fridge. It wasn't plugged in and was mostly empty except for a piece of butcher paper taped inside the door. Written on it in red marker was a checklist. Silas, gloves, tape, staples, thermos, leave here, receipt done. I backed away and checked my bag. My gloves were gone. I didn't like how the walls suddenly felt too close. The windows were fogging up from the inside now, and I hadn't been breathing that hard. I decided to finish up and get out of there before the road iced over worse than it already had. I headed for the hallway to get to the back bedroom. That's when I noticed the floor sloped downward. Not much, but enough. I was sure it hadn't been like that when I came in. At the end of the hallway, the bedroom door was wide open. I was almost certain I'd left it shut. I stepped in. The insulation bundles were stacked neatly in the corner. Too neatly, and there were more than I remembered bringing. I walked over, reached down to start the install, and spotted something tucked beneath one of the bats. A checklist, cleanly printed. S. Wireless, W. Winter. Entry statues deferred. At the bottom, someone had written in the last item, RE. Entry condition met. My throat went dry. I stood up, my breath fogging heavier now than it had in the crawl space. My hands weren't just cold, they were trembling. I packed everything fast. Shoved my tools back into my bag, barely checking to make sure I had it all. When I got to the front door, I reached into my coat pocket. The key was gone. I checked everywhere. Hooked by the door, nothing. Pockets, empty. The bolt on the inside wouldn't turn. I tried the door anyway, pushing, then pulling, then shoving with my shoulder. Nothing. It didn't even rattle in the frame. I went to the windows, frosted shut. The chimney, sealed with welded steel. I walked back to the kitchen, ready to grab my phone and call Liam as soon as I had service. But my phone was gone. In its place, sitting where the thermos had been, was a new work tag. Blank except for one word, repeat. I opened my backpack again, no phone. Instead, there was a cloth pouch I hadn't seen before. Inside were surveyor's sticks, thin, labeled strips of wood. Each one marked with my initials. Each one dated, some going back 3 weeks. Some charred at the edges like they'd been burned, then smothered. I walked back to the crawlspace hatch. This time, when I opened it, there was a faint orange glow below, like a desk lamp. I dropped down again, slowly. The insulation was already up, all of it. numbered in order, each panel neat and square. Panel 8 had my name written across it in permanent marker. Behind it, something moved. Just a rustle. I pulled it back. There was nothing there, just cold dirt and frost-covered ground. I climbed up in a hurry. As I reached the top, the hatch slammed shut on its own, catching my wrist hard enough to bruise. I yanked it open, rolled out, and slammed it behind me. Then I heard the sound of the front door unlocking. I turned. It was wide open now. Snow swirling in. I didn't think. I just ran. Slipped on the porch steps, fell hard into the snow, scrambled to my feet, and threw myself into the truck. It started. I didn't care which direction I was headed, just followed the tracks I'd made coming in, hoping the wind hadn't erased them completely. Eventually, the trees thinned and the road flattened. I pulled into the first gas station I could find with bars on my phone. Called Liam. He sounded confused. Said the job had been logged as complete 3 days earlier. I told him what I saw, what I found. There was a long pause. "I don't know who submitted that report," he said. "You're not even on the system anymore." I opened the app. My profile was still there. No active jobs. Just a red flag at the top, field file, archived. I never went back. Never touched another job up in those mountains. I'd taken over for a ranger named Ben, who'd gone on medical leave mid-season. No one told me why, just that he left suddenly and wouldn't be back until spring. The department let me stay at the outpost, as long as I kept the heater running and filled out the weekly reports. It was exactly what I'd asked for. After everything that happened back home, dropping out of school, the fights with my family, the way my friends kind of evaporated once I started pulling away, I just wanted space. Isolation didn't bother me. If anything, it felt like a relief. I settled into a rhythm pretty quickly. Wake up early, check the radios, log the weather, hike out to replace camera cards or clear down branches. The days felt full even if they weren't busy. I cooked with canned stuff, read paperbacks left behind by other rangers, and slept on a cot near the front door. I didn't eat much. But even during the first week, I noticed small things that didn't add up. The building layout was the first clue. The front corridor was just slightly off-center. The wall beside the storage room looked bowed, like the lumber had warped from age, but the angle didn't match the rest of the structure. I'd walk through certain parts of the outpost and feel like I was stepping into something added hastily, just enough off balance to make my body notice, even if my brain wasn't sure why. Then there was the cabinet. It looked ordinary. Just a shallow supply cupboard built into the wall between the main room and the sleeping area. I opened it one morning to grab some tarp rolls and realized my arm went in farther than it should have. Like the cabinet didn't end where it was supposed to. I leaned in, reached around, and felt rough boards extending deeper than the wall allowed. I even checked the building's exterior later, walked around with a flashlight, and there was nothing. No bump out, no false wall, no extension. Just logs and siding. The next couple days, I started measuring things, not with a tape but by pacing. I counted steps from one wall to another, measured how far the cot sat from the corner, that kind of thing. At first, it was just something to do. But the numbers kept changing. One day, the back door was 10 paces from the cot. The next, it was 11.5. I'd shift the furniture a little just to test myself, but even the walls seemed like they were moving. Not in some dramatic way, just by inches. Enough to throw me off. One morning, I came back from a hike and found the radio chair turned around, facing the window. I never left it like that. I hadn't had a single visitor since arriving. The place had one working lock, and it was always engaged. I stood there staring at the chair for way too long, just trying to come up with a reason that didn't feel crazy. Eventually, I turned it back and didn't mention it in the report. That night, I heard something fall in the back corridor. It was a soft, metallic clatter, like a tool rolling across the floor. I checked it out and found one of the old metal canisters from the storage room sitting in the middle of the hall. I packed those away on a high shelf. It didn't make any sense for one to be out, much less in the hallway. I put it back. An hour later, I found it again, sitting just outside the main room. By the end of the week, things escalated. I woke up to the heater off one morning. Not just powered down, the switch was fully locked, the safety tab pressed and twisted, like someone had intentionally disabled it. I checked the fuse panel. Every screw was half unscrewed. Not loose from vibration, clean, careful turns. It felt surgical. I tightened everything, restarted the heat, and stayed in the main room until sunrise, watching for movement. The next night, something shifted again. The cot was pushed closer to the front door. Not a lot, just enough that I bumped my shin when I walked by. I stood there looking at it, then walked into the storage room to see if anything else had moved. The air in there felt warmer, dense, like when you open a dryer mid-cycle. I stepped back and watched the room from the hall. By day 9, I stopped sleeping more than an hour at a time. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd jerk awake to some small sound, a creak, a whisper of air, sometimes just silence that felt wrong. I started keeping my boots on at night. My pack stayed ready by the door. I tried leaving once, packed my gear at sunrise and followed the marker trail I'd left along the ridge. I tied bright orange tape around trees every 50 feet when I arrived, just to make sure I could find my way back. I followed it for over an hour straight line, never veering. But eventually, the trees started looking familiar. I came over a small rise and froze. I was behind the outpost. My boot prints from earlier were still fresh in the snow. Inside, the smell had changed. Wet copper, like a bloodstain left to soak into wood. I checked every drawer, every box. The sleeping bag I'd folded was unzipped and draped over the chair. A coffee mug I hadn't touched since Tuesday was sitting in the sink, cracked down the side like it'd been dropped. But nothing was gone. Nothing stolen, just rearranged. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the corner with the flashlight on, listening to the wood creak and settle. Around 3 in the morning, I saw movement in the cabinet. Not a shape, just a subtle shift in the shadows, like something turning slowly inside. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then the whisper came, not loud, just a strained, dragging rasp. My name, drawn out like it was being pulled through grit. It came from behind the cabinet door. I didn't wait. I grabbed my pack, shoved the door open, and ran into the snow. This time, the trail held. I made it to the ridge, then down to the road by dawn. I flagged down a logging truck with a busted taillight. The driver didn't ask what happened. I think he saw my face and decided it wasn't his business. I stayed in Oakmere with a coworker for the rest of the season, picked up smaller assignments, trail cleanup, storm checks, desk work. I didn't tell anyone what really happened. Just said the outpost had weird structural issues, maybe some gas leak, maybe mold. People believed it. When the department sent a cleanup team that spring, they said the place looked mostly untouched. Supplies were still there, nothing damaged. But one thing was different. Inside the cabinet, the deep one, someone had carved my name. They sealed the building a week later.